Most people believe commitment comes from doing more, giving more, or waiting longer. But the truth is, commitment doesn't respond to effort, it responds to clarity. There is a small group of women, barely 1%, who consistently experience secure, intentional commitment. Not because they are perfect, lucky, or manipulative, but because they understand one powerful psychological secret that changes how relationships form at the deepest level. This is not about control. This is not about games. And this is definitely not about convincing anyone to stay. The 1% of women understand that emotional standards must come before emotional attachment. They don't allow feelings to lead the process, they allow clarity to lead first. Emotional attachment is powerful, but when it forms without standards, it often creates confusion, imbalance, and unspoken expectations. These women recognize that emotions can deepen quickly, but commitment requires structure, consistency, and alignment. They stay aware of how they feel without letting feelings override what they need. Instead of bonding through constant availability, over-giving, or emotional intensity, they observe how someone shows up. They pay attention to reliability, communication, and effort over time. If emotional chemistry is present but standards are not being met, they don't rationalize it away. They don't tell themselves stories to protect a connection that lacks stability. Emotional attachment never becomes an excuse to accept less than what aligns with their values. This doesn't mean they are cold or guarded. It means they are intentional. They allow emotional closeness to grow only when behavior feels safe and consistent. They understand that attachment formed too early can cloud judgment and create fear of loss. By pacing emotional investment, they protect their peace and maintain perspective. Another key difference is that they don't confuse potential with reality. Emotional attachment often forms around what could be, while emotional standards are grounded in what is. They stay rooted in the present rather than projecting a future that hasn't been earned. When something feels off, they trust that signal instead of suppressing it for the sake of connection. Because emotional standards come first, attachment becomes healthier, calmer, and more secure. There is no urgency to lock something in, no pressure to prove worth, no anxiety about being enough, only a steady awareness of alignment, self-respect, and emotional clarity as the connection unfolds in real time. The 1% of women don't chase commitment because they understand that pursuit often weakens desire instead of strengthening it. They know that commitment is not created through persuasion, sacrifice, or proving value. It forms naturally when someone feels inspired, respected, and emotionally safe. Instead of trying to secure a future through effort, they focus on becoming deeply grounded in their own worth. They move through connections without urgency. There is no pressure to lock things in, no anxiety-driven overgiving, no fear-based people-pleasing. Their energy is calm and self-contained, which creates space for genuine interest to grow. Because they are not trying to be chosen, they naturally stand out. People sense when someone is rooted in self-value rather than approval-seeking. Another important difference is how they respond to uncertainty. When clarity is missing, they don't panic or overanalyze. They don't send extra messages to pull attention back or adjust themselves to be more appealing. They remain consistent with who they are, trusting that alignment cannot be forced. This stability often creates contrast with others who chase validation, making their presence feel rare and grounding. They also understand that attraction deepens when access is earned, not freely given. Their time, energy, and emotional availability are valuable, and they treat them that way. When someone experiences that value, commitment becomes a desire rather than an obligation. It feels like a natural progression instead of a conversation that needs convincing. By focusing on self-respect instead of outcome, they shift the dynamic entirely. They are not waiting to be chosen, they are choosing whether something aligns with their life. This mindset subtly changes how they speak, how they move, and how they respond. Commitment grows in the space where authenticity, confidence, and self-value quietly lead the connection forward. The 1% of women understand that commitment cannot be pulled toward them through effort, sacrifice, or emotional labor. They recognize that chasing creates an imbalance where one side is proving and the other is evaluating. Instead of stepping into that role, they remain anchored in their own life, values, and rhythm. Their focus is not on securing commitment, but on observing whether consistency naturally forms. They don't confuse attraction with availability. While many people believe being more accessible increases closeness, these women understand that unlimited access often reduces appreciation. They allow connection to grow at a pace that feels mutual. When interest is present, they respond warmly, but they never abandon their routines, goals, or emotional center to maintain momentum. This balance creates a sense of stability that feels rare. When effort is not reciprocated, they don't increase theirs to compensate. They don't explain their worth or try to inspire interest through performance. They simply take note and adjust their level of engagement accordingly. This quiet self-regulation shifts the dynamic with a confrontation or games. It signals self-trust and emotional maturity. They also understand that commitment arises when someone feels free to choose, not cornered into deciding. Pressure closes emotional doors, while calm confidence leaves them open. By removing urgency and expectation, they allow genuine desire to surface on its own. This often leads to deeper curiosity and stronger emotional investment over time. Their self-value shows up in subtle ways. In how they speak without over-explaining. In how they listen without losing themselves. In how they enjoy connection without attaching their identity to its outcome. They don't fear walking away from something that doesn't meet them where they stand. That willingness creates a quiet power that doesn't demand attention but naturally commands respect, shaping the connection through presence, steadiness, and choice rather than pursuit or persuasion. The 1% of women understand that commitment is deeply connected to emotional readiness and timing, not pressure or ultimatums. They recognize that pushing for certainty before emotional capacity is available only creates resistance. Instead of forcing conversations too early or suppressing their needs too long, they develop a strong awareness of pacing. They know when to lean in and when to pause, allowing connection to unfold without strain. They pay attention to emotional availability rather than verbal interest. Someone can express attraction, make plans, and enjoy connection while still not being ready for commitment. These women don't take that personally or try to accelerate the process. They understand that readiness cannot be negotiated into existence. It either emerges naturally or it doesn't. Because of this, they don't confuse patience with self-abandonment. When timing feels off, they don't wait indefinitely in hope. They quietly check in with themselves. They ask whether the current pace aligns with their emotional needs and life goals. If it doesn't, they don't attempt to manage someone else's readiness by adjusting their own standards. They remain honest with themselves even when emotions are involved. They also understand that pressure often creates the opposite effect of commitment. When someone feels rushed, evaluated, or cornered, emotional walls go up. The 1% creates space instead of tension. Their calm presence allows clarity to surface without force. This often leads others to reflect more deeply on what they want because the environment feels safe rather than demanding. Timing for them is not about waiting passively. It's about staying aligned while observing consistency. If readiness grows, they stay open. If it doesn't, they don't linger in confusion. They respect the natural rhythm of emotional development while honoring their own boundaries, allowing commitment to arise from mutual readiness rather than obligation, fear, or pressure-driven decisions that lack emotional grounding. The 1% of women understand that boundaries are not walls meant to push people away, but standards that protect emotional balance. They communicate what they need clearly and calmly without over-explaining or apologizing. There is no fear that honesty will cause loss because they trust that anything aligned will respect their boundaries rather than challenge them. This confidence removes the anxiety that often surrounds difficult conversations. They don't wait until resentment builds to speak up. When something feels off, they address it early with clarity and composure. Their tone is not emotional or defensive, but grounded and direct. They express preferences and limits as facts, not demands. This creates an atmosphere where communication feels mature instead of confrontational. Another important distinction is that they don't negotiate their boundaries once they are set. They listen, they observe responses, and they let behavior speak. If boundaries are repeatedly ignored, they don't threaten or argue. They simply reduce access. This consistency teaches others how to treat them without needing constant reminders. They are also not afraid of being misunderstood. They know that people who benefit from blurred boundaries often resist clarity. Rather than softening their needs to be more likable, they remain steady in what they require. This self-trust builds internal security and reduces emotional dependence on external approval. Because they are not afraid of loss, their boundaries carry weight. There is no desperation attached to being accepted. They understand that respect cannot be negotiated into existence. When someone realizes that access is conditional on mutual respect, behavior naturally shifts. Boundaries become the framework through which commitment feels safe, intentional, and sustainable, allowing connection to deepen without sacrificing self-worth or emotional stability in the process. The 1% of women choose alignment over potential because they understand how easily imagination can replace reality. Potential feels exciting because it promises growth, change, and a future that hasn't yet been tested. Alignment, however, is quiet and observable. It shows up in shared values, consistent behavior, and compatible life directions. These women stay grounded in what is happening now rather than what might happen later. They don't fall in love with promises, ideas, or versions of someone that appear only under certain conditions. They watch how effort is shown when things are simple, inconvenient, or uncomfortable. Alignment reveals itself through through emotional availability and mutual prioritization. If these elements are missing, no amount of potential is enough to sustain a healthy connection. They also understand that potential often asks for patience without security. It requires waiting, hoping, and adjusting expectations. Alignment doesn't require self-betrayal. It feels steady rather than confusing. When values align, decisions feel easier and communication flows without constant clarification. These women recognize that struggle is not a prerequisite for depth. Another difference is how they evaluate compatibility. They don't focus on chemistry alone. They pay attention to how conflict is handled, how boundaries are respected, and how consistency shows up over time. When misalignment becomes clear, they don't stay to fix, teach, or inspire change. They accept information as truth rather than a challenge to overcome. Choosing alignment means releasing attachment to stories about who someone could become. It means trusting that the right connection will not require convincing or endurance. By prioritizing alignment, they create relationships built on mutual understanding and shared direction, where commitment feels natural because both people are already moving in the same emotional and practical direction without force or fantasy driving the connection forward.